This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, rel-mar McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X-Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone, a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X-Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern, right here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Digital Satellite Network, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And to find out about the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, just go to www.xzbn.com. xzbn.net. Sorry about that. My guest this hour is Mark Shaw, X-Zone Nation. He is a former criminal defense lawyer and legal analyst for CNN, ESPN, and USA Today for the Mike Tyson, O.J. Simpson, and Kobe Bryant cases. Mark Shaw is an investigative reporter and author of 25 books, including The Poison Patriarch, Miscarriage of Justice, and Beneath the Mask of Holiness. Mark, whose novel Courage in the Face of Evil will be released in April, has written for USA Today, Huffington Post, and Aspen Daily News. And if you'd like to find out more about our guest this hour, www.thereporterwhoknewtoomuch.com. Joining me now is Mark Shaw. And Mark, welcome to the X-Zone.
Hey, Rob, thank you so much.
Tell me, I have to ask you this start-off question because of the work that you've done. Is why is it after 50 years plus, the JFK assassination is still the greatest murder mystery in history?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I'm sure your listeners will all have their own idea about that. And it fits perfectly because I started, getting interested in it. I never was before when I wrote a book about almost 10 years ago, about Melvin Belli, who represented Jack Ruby, who shot Lee Harvey Oswald. And people have asked me, well, how'd you get into that? Well, I knew Mr. Belli, and so I decided to write a book about him. But, I wasn't interested in it. I think it's John Kennedy. If this had been the murder of another president of some sort, without JFK's charisma, without Camelot, without Jackie, without the whole Kennedy family, the mystery of the whole Kennedy family, and the mystique of JFK in office and sharing girlfriends with mobsters, and just Joe Kennedy, the bootlegger who made the millions, and Bobby, and all of that. I think that's why. I think it's just the greatest murder mystery in history because it's JFK. If it was someone else, Jimmy Carter, or let's say, or Lyndon Johnson, or somebody like that, I'm not so sure people would be that interested, but this case is still on the lips of many people, as we've discovered through this new book about Dorothy Kilgallen.
Now, of the assassination documents released by the government in October, can you pinpoint a few that are helping to unravel the mystery, including those dealing with conspiracy theories?
Well, sure, and I wish there were more, Rob. It's just hard to believe. You know, people expect transparency in their government, and yet we don't have it. And we didn't have it 50 years ago when we'll talk about Dorothy Kilgallen. We don't have it now. Very disappointing that this guy who's the leader of our country, and I don't want to get into that too much, but, you know, only released part of the documents. I mean, 50 years later, Rob, come on. I mean, what can be in those documents that can cause a lot of problems? Unless there's true government corruption and that kind of thing, which is very possible. But I looked through them carefully because, again, the reporter knew too much, which is a true crime murder mystery about Dorothy Kilgallen's investigation of the JFK assassination. I looked for clues in there that would deal with Dorothy's theory, which we can talk about a little bit about the assassinations, her 18-month investigation. To look for things that were of interest to me because of what she had written about. And as we'll talk about, I think she's the most credible reporter to have ever covered the JFK assassination because she was there. She was at the Jack Ruby trial. She interviewed Ruby. I mean, we can talk about that. But two or three things I'd point out. Number one, there was a document that basically, an FBI document that basically said what we knew at the time, or what people could see at the time, and that was J. Edgar Hoover launching that absurd Oswald alone theory that he tried to get everybody to buy, and most people did. There's an FBI document that basically says, and I summarize just a little bit, Hoover is telling all the agents, we must make sure that the American people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated the president, and only Lee Harvey Oswald. So that was the first one that caught my attention because Dorothy, 7 days after JFK died, wrote a column called The Oswald File Must Not Close. I mean, she didn't buy all that, and we can get into that in a minute. There were a couple others. One was that Jack Ruby was very, very friendly with the Dallas Police Department. I think the words were that he had a great in with the police department. And you remember that the Warren Commission completely demolished that idea that Ruby had any friends in the Dallas Police Department. I mean, it was absurd to think that he didn't. I interviewed Bill Alexander, who prosecuted Ruby, and he told me, hey, Jack would walk down the halls of the police department, and people would say, hey, Jack, how you doing? And they all came to his carousel club and all of that. And so, Dorothy knew that as well. And then the third one I would tell you is that it's come from another source, and that is that, like your listeners, who I hope will let me know if they find out any new information about the JFK assassination, especially with regard to Dorothy Kilgallen. But I had one reader in Fresno who got in touch with me, and I didn't find any of this in the JFK files, but he found the Jack Ruby trial transcripts, which have never been released before, and has authorized me to put those in a follow-up book. And there's some fascinating material in there, and as I say, Dorothy Kilgallen was right there in that trial, so she listened to some of this. But one of them is that there's a parking. I think you'll find this interesting. There's a parking lot attendant across the street from the Carousel Club, Ruby's club, and he says that on the Saturday before Oswald was shot, Ruby came over and used the pay phone there. And this guy listened, and he seems like a credible witness, that Ruby asked when Oswald would be transferred and then said, and I will be there. So that really puts into perspective the ludicrous notion that Ruby just happened to be in the Dallas Police Department when Oswald was transferred. So
but how
there's some good material out there.
But how can we say for certain that the conversation that Ruby was having on the phone was directly, he was talking about the transfer of Oswald to the, from the Dallas Police Department. Isn't it possible that he was talking about something else?
Well, this is trial testimony under oath, so people can make up their own mind. That's what I like to do in my books. I present all the facts, and then people can make up their own minds. But this seems pretty credible to me, reading the testimony.
Right.
But again, all of that material was just completely ignored by the Warren Commission.
All right, let's go back a step or two. Tell me about Dorothy Kilgallen. Who is she?
Well, you mentioned I've written a lot of books, and I have, and you just never know, Rob, what can happen. I wasn't going to write this book. I had no intention of writing this book at all, and God, I'm so pleased it's become a bestseller, and we've just signed a deal for it to be a television series as a true crime murder mystery as to what happened to Dorothy. But I never intended to write the book, and I mentioned Melvin Belli before, and while I was writing that book about Melvin Belli, I interviewed several people that knew him, and they were talking about Belli's affection for the mafia and the question marks about why Melvin Belli used this crazy insanity defense to defend Ruby and all of that. And so we're moving along, and he said, by the way, Mark, and this is a doctor in San Diego, said, by the way, Mark, Melvin Belli knew Dorothy Kilgallen. And I said, well, how? And he said, well, he said, listen, you probably remember her from What's My Line? And I said, well, I certainly do. That was the hit television show on CBS for 15 years on Sunday nights in the 50s and 60s. And she was the kind of the prominent panelist on that show. They tried if you'll remember, to guess occupations, strange occupations of people. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I remember. He said, oh, Mark, you know nothing about her. She was that star of that show. But also, she had a syndicated newspaper column, syndicated to 200 newspapers across the country. She had a radio show listened to 1 million people, and she covered many of the major criminal trials of the 20th century, including Dr. Sam Shepard, which became the movie The Fugitive, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case, and also the Jack Ruby trial, and that's where Belli met her. And I said, really? He said, yes, and it's pretty strange. He said, when Dorothy died, Belli said, they've killed Dorothy. Now they'll go after Jack Ruby. They've killed Ruby. Now they'll go after Jack Ruby. And, I'm a curious guy like you, Rob. I did a little research on you, and you're a man of the truth, and you also are a curious guy. And if, I couldn't let that quote go by.
Sure.
So what I did is start to look into Kilgallen's life and her life and times and her death and all that happened to her based on that quote that I couldn't get out of my mind.
The Warren Commission. There's been so much talk about the Warren Commission, what they did, what they didn't do, what they kind of fluffed aside. What, as an attorney yourself, and as somebody who's done research into the JFK assassination and looked at these trial transcripts that have yet to be released, what is your professional opinion of the Warren Commission?
Well, you have to remember at that particular time, now the excuse will be that, those people in the Warren Commission and J. Edgar Hoover all wanted to make sure that the American the American people and people around the world felt safe. If there was any sort of a conspiracy or a group of people who were involved or anything like that, and they might still be out there, and if they killed JFK, you're going to frighten a lot of people that way. But, from the start, I think there was the feeling that there was a lack of responsibility, taking responsibility for JFK's death. You have to go back a little bit to the 1960 election to understand what happened here.
All right, why don't we do this? We've got to take a commercial break. When we come back, let's go back to the 1960 election.
Sure.
All right, Exo Nation, my guest this hour is Mark Shaw. His website, 2 websites, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org and TheReporterWhoKnewTooMuch.com. And Mark and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't forget, X Zone Nation, you can always check out of what we're doing, what shows we have available for you, 7/24/365 by going to www.xzbn.net. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. My guest this hour is Mark Shaw, and his websites are the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. I'm sorry, that's the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, and the ReporterWhoKnewTooMuch.com. Mark, let's go back in time like Mr. Peabody and Sherman did in the Wayback Machine. Go back to 1960 to the JFK election.
Oh, I love those guys.
Yeah, they were great.
Well, here's what happened. I wrote the book about Melvin Belli, King of the Courtroom. It was a success. Then I decided, because I knew about Belli's affiliation with the Mafia and his representation of the gangster Mickey Cohen and all that, I wondered about his representation of Jack Ruby. So I wrote a second book called The Poison Patriarch. And that was about Joe Kennedy and the Kennedys and all of that, and that moved back into the area of 1960. People remember in 1960, it was Richard Nixon and JFK.
Yeah.
And Joe Kennedy was a smart guy. He wanted to be president himself, but he couldn't be, so he, because of his affection for Adolf Hitler when he was ambassador to Great Britain, so he wanted one of his sons to be president with all his money and everything, so JFK ran. And it was a close election, and he knew JFK was going to lose. If they didn't win Illinois and West Virginia, those two states, they were done. Well, Joe used some of his links to the Mafia through Frank Sinatra, and they convinced the Mafia that, hey, you help us win Illinois and West Virginia with your money and power, and then when we get in the White House, we'll leave you guys alone. Well, that's what happened. The Mafia helped them. They won those two states, and JFK became president. But after that election, Joe Kennedy hated those Mafia guys, and so he actually I had a witness who was right there when Joe Kennedy ordered JFK to appoint Bobby Kennedy Attorney General. And predictably, Bobby Kennedy, who wanted to make a big name for himself, went after those guys, specifically Carlos Marcello, who was the Mafia Don in New Orleans. So you have to go back to that to understand then what happened with the JFK assassination. And in the book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, these are not my words. These are Dorothy Kilgallen's words, who was, as I say, unlike all of the people who've written about the JFK assassination, including myself, she was there. We weren't there. So she's an eyewitness to history. She sat right there at the Ruby trial and all of this, and she figured this all out. She was a very powerful. The New York Post called her the most powerful female voice in America, and she was a powerhouse, and she figured all this out. Well, she's going one way, believing that the Oswald theory, alone theory, is ludicrous, but J. Edgar Hoover is shouting Oswald alone. Why is he doing that? Because if, in fact, there's any sort of conspiracy or whatever, it makes him culpable, because he's the one who should have known about other people who might have killed the president. So he's shouting that, and then I told you about that document that was just been released,
right,
where he says we have to convince the American people it was Oswald alone. Well, then that filters up into the Warren Commission because J. Edgar Hoover is basically running that whole thing. He's protecting what's going on with the Warren Commission. He's only feeding them information that he wants to feed them. And so those poor saps that are on that Warren Commission, I mean, Dorothy Kilgallen was never interviewed. Many people weren't. Anybody who had any, theories or facts or anything that was against the Oswald alone theory were not permitted to that information was not permitted to the Warren Commission people. So it was a farce, basically. And I think through the years we found that most people believe that's what happened, that it was a slam dunk, it was a rubber stamp for J. Edgar Hoover, that for some reason, Lee Harvey Oswald orchestrated alone the killing of JFK.
Unreal. Let me ask you this question. In your opinion, why was JFK assassinated?
Well, again, former criminal defense lawyer, and so I'll go to motive.
Okay.
And you have to look at motive. Now, everybody has, gone towards Lee Harvey Oswald. What was the motive? Well, that's a dead end. There's so much complex information about him, nobody could ever figure out anything. You look at LBJ. Well, he became president, so that's a pretty good motive, but there's so many layers involved with pointing at LBJ as the person who masterminded the assassinations that it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't think Dorothy Kilgallen believed it did. The CIA, the government, Dorothy looked into that, and she just felt like in her own mind that didn't provide the strongest motive. What was the strongest motive? Well, Marcello is sitting out there in New Orleans, and he's saying to himself, Joe Kennedy double-crossed me. Bobby Kennedy is now coming after me. He's deported me once, and he's trying to do it again. He has me in a racketeering trial in New Orleans as November 1963 comes along. I can't just stand by with this, so here's the deal. I could kill Bobby Kennedy, and obviously I hate him, and I would have him. I could kill him or have him killed. But then JFK is going to come after me with everything the government has. But wait a second. If I kill JFK, then Bobby Kennedy is powerless. And Rob, that's exactly what happened. The authorities, the FBI, nobody came after those guys again. They were just let off scot-free, and nobody bothered them at all. So in that way, you have to think about, well, who won? Well, in fact, the mafia people won, but especially Marcello, who was never bothered again. So common sense motive is what I think drove the killing of JFK, and it's really sad. I mean, JFK died at 44. Dorothy Kilgallen, as you'll learn as we talk about, died at 44 or at 52. Neither of those two people should have died, and especially JFK.
So why do you think everybody is so focused on Oswald instead of dealing with Jack Ruby?
Yeah.
Is Jack Ruby the smoking gun in this case?
Oh, yeah. Again, I'll just tell you again, the words in this book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, are Dorothy Kilgallen's. People can go to that DorothyKilgallenStory.org. They can read all of her columns. They can read all of the quotes that she had about the case, the JFK assassination. They can look at more than 50 videotaped interviews of the people that knew Dorothy the best and make up their own mind with regard to what she's saying. But she, right away, couldn't figure out in her own mind how Oswald could have pulled all this off. It just didn't make sense to her. You'll see 6 or 7 columns that she wrote that just, common sense-wise, it didn't make any sense to her. And so what did she do? She focused on Ruby because she believed that he was the key to understanding what happened. And she knew about his mafia affiliation. She knew about his connection with Marcello in New Orleans. I mean, she told people she was going to blow the lid off of this case. It was the case of a lifetime. And she told people, if the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination, it would cost me my life. I'm afraid for my life and my family. I mean, she was on the right track with regard to all of it, because she was the one who focused on Ruby, while everybody else was going in the other direction, focusing on Oswald, who was, I think in many ways, more of a fascinating character, the unknown part of him. Was it the Russians? Was it the Cubans? Was it this? Was it that? So, many people went that direction, and instead of Dorothy, who really looked at it, hey, wait a minute, who's the key to all of this? And that was Ruby.
We had Judith Very Baker on the show, Oswald's girlfriend, and she told us point blank that Oswald worked for the CIA.
Well, he may have. See, he may have worked for the Cubans. He may have worked for so many different people, but nobody's ever going to figure out all of that stuff. That's what I say. Is the truth ever going to come out? People ask me all the time. Well, all I can say is just read Dorothy's account, and then, of course, what happened to her. Because I think if you realize what happened to her, that she did not commit suicide, that she was didn't die an accidental death of barbiturates, but in fact was murdered, I think that speaks for itself that her investigation is, in fact, the most credible of any investigation of the JFK assassination in history.
Then why don't we hear more about her side of the story instead of the other side?
Well, you're such a good questioner. Well, here's what happened. Dorothy had made one trip to New Orleans after Jack Ruby permitted that interview. And so she went to New Orleans. She found new information about Marcello. She had connected he and Ruby, and I even think she connected Oswald to that. So she's writing this book for Random House, and she's making a second trip to New Orleans. And she tells people that she's going to meet somebody there who has new information for her and all of that. She's writing this book. She has this thick investigative file with all of her facts and conclusions in there. Again, she's the only person to have interviewed Ruby twice. She exposed his Warren Commission testimony before it was to be released, so that was a big deal. So she had the real inside story of all that was happening. And in November of 1965, she was all ready to write that book. And those who were threatened by that just couldn't let her write that book. So what happened is, on November 8, 1965, Dorothy Kilgallen was found in a bedroom in her townhouse, in a bedroom she never slept in, wearing clothes she never wore to bed. She had on makeup, a hairpiece, and false eyelashes she never wore to bed. There was a book on her lap that she'd read before. Just without, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that there's some sort of a staged death scene there. Well, what happens? The medical examiner, not from the Manhattan branch in New York City, but from the Brooklyn branch, which I was able to find primary witnesses who were right there that talk about that branch in Brooklyn being controlled by the mafia. They came to Kilgallen's townhouse. They found an empty bottle of Seconal on a table there by her bed, and just immediately decided that she had died of a overdose of barbiturates. An autopsy was then performed. That autopsy report is in the book. It's never been published before. And they basically decided she died of a Seconal overdose with alcohol. That was published in the paper. That was what everybody thought happened. There was absolutely no investigation by the New York Police Department, which is just hard to believe based on that staged death scene. But basically, Rob, she disappeared from the face of the earth, despite her popularity and her fame and being so powerful and everything. Nobody came forward, not her family, not her colleagues at What's My Line, not her journalist friends. None of those people came forward. Because why? Well, they knew Dorothy was working on the JFK assassination. All right, if the same people that killed JFK killed Dorothy, then they don't want to come forward. They're all scared, and they don't do anything. And so basically, until I discovered this new evidence that we can talk about that points towards murder, Dorothy Kilgallen disappeared from the face of the earth. And I should say, all of these books out there that have been written, Vincent Bugliosi, Gerald Posner, even Stephen King, all these other kind of people who've written about the JFK assassination, you don't find anything in there about Dorothy Kilgallen.
All right, stand by. We've got to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. XZNation, Mark Shaw is our guest. www.thedorothykilgallenstory.org and thereporterwhoknewtoomuch.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. And don't forget, you can always find out what's going on the X Zone Broadcast Network www.xzbn.net, and send me your emails, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. Mark and I return on the other side of this break after the news. Don't go away.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Mark Shaw is my guest, Exonation. www.theDorothyKilgallenstory.org and thereporterwhoknewtoomuch.com. Mark, let me ask you something here. If Dorothy Kilgallen was so afraid of, reprisal or repercussions for her investigation, why did she keep on telling people what she was doing? Why didn't she seek protection if she felt that her life was threatened?
Well, that's the most interesting question, and I want to start by saying there's a bit of a paranormal aspect of this book, and I think your listeners should know about it. I wasn't going to write this book, as I say, but I felt like somebody was just kind of tapping me on the shoulder, and the person that tapped me on the shoulder, I am certain, was Dorothy Kilgallen. For whatever reason, and I'm honored that she did, I think she chose me to write this book. And I can only tell you, and I'll give you a couple of examples if you'd like them.
Sure, please.
Of throughout the writing of this book, I felt like Dorothy was right there with me, that she was guiding me along. A couple times I thought, maybe there's not enough here, and then I would find something. And I just felt like Dorothy had chosen me, her voice from the hereafter, that she was leading me along with regard to all of this. And I'm not sure why, because nobody ever wrote about this. There was a book in the 70s, but it was very incomplete. So once I tackled this, I felt like that I needed to see what I could really find out about Dorothy. And what I'm going to tell you leads to your question, which is, why did she make herself such a target and not do something about it? Well, Dorothy was... there's nobody can touch her with regard to a media icon, and that's in the subtitle of the book. Not Oprah, not Diane Sawyer, nobody. She had this multifaceted media career with What's My Line, with the radio show, with syndicated to 200 newspapers when that's where people got most of their news. She covered those famous trials, and the Jack Ruby trial, of course, as well. I mean, she was on top. She had this bully pulpit and all of that. And the way I'm able to tell you that is because I think, again, Dorothy led me along. At one particular point, I thought, I've got to find some people who knew Dorothy Kilgallen here and can give me kind of an eyewitness feeling about her, because I like primary sources. I don't like to speculate in my books and all of that. So at one point I thought, I don't know how I'm going to do this. That's a long time ago, 50-plus years. And, that thought was in my mind, and one night during the middle of the night, for some reason, this idea came to me that maybe I'll go look at the Internet and see if there's ever been any articles written about Dorothy. And I found right away, and again, I think Dorothy pointed me there, an article called Who Killed Dorothy Kilgallen in 2007. It was written in a magazine called Midwest Today, and they focused on celebrities born in the Midwest, and Dorothy was born in Chicago before they moved to New York City, and she became a newspaper woman there. So I went to that site, and I found this article, and oh my gosh, I was thrilled, because I saw that her two best friends, who were her hairdressers, the last woman to appear on, the woman who appeared on What's My Line, the last show that Dorothy did, and also Joe Tannehill, who was the co-counsel for Jack Ruby. They were all quoted in this article, as well as a guy named Ron Pataki, who was very romantically involved with Kilgallen near the end of her life. And I thought, oh, boy. I mean, you can just imagine, Rob, how excited I was. So I called this publisher, and I said, this is wonderful. I would love to interview these people. And he said, well, Mark, I have some bad news. They're all dead. And the silence was there. My heart dropped. And he said, but I have some good news. There was a woman in Los Angeles and her colleague who were so passionate about, obsessed with Kilgallen's death, they interviewed those people and they videotaped the interviews. And he said, I'm going to give you the name of this woman in L.A., and he did. And it took me almost 6 months, Rob, to get her to trust me with those videos, and all of them are up there on the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. And so Charles Sinclair, her closest friend, I think, and Charles Simpson and Mark Sinclair, the two hairdressers. Joe Tannehill is up there. Catherine Stone, the last woman, the person who was on Kilgallen's final What's My Line. All those interviews were there, and there's 50 or 60 of them that people can look at that are quoted, and they're all in the book. So that was a huge break in this case. But I came to realize from what they told me, and I'm now getting to your question, that Dorothy really thought she was invincible. She was so big. Yeah, she bought a gun, and she changed her will and all of that, but she thought she was invincible. And she was scared, all of that, but she couldn't shut up about this. One listener put me in touch with a woman in Illinois, for instance, who waited on Dorothy Kilgallen the night before she died at P.J. Clark's, which is a big-time pub in New York City. And I went there with my research and sat right where Dorothy sat. And this woman told me that basically Dorothy was talking about the JFK assassination to anybody that would listen. So she couldn't keep her mouth shut about it. But I think these enemies who had circled, as I say, the book is set up as a true crime murder mystery with 5 or 6 suspects, including her husband, Frank Sinatra, Carlos Marcello, Marcello, and then J. Edgar Hoover, all of these people. But the enemies were circling because they could not let her write that book for Random House, and you may be wondering why. Well, if what Dorothy uncovered, the investigation facts that she found, if that was printed in a book, that would have, in my opinion, and I think other people's, triggered a grand jury investigation. And Marcello, Hoover, all of those people that were could be held culpable for what happened to JFK, they couldn't let her write that book.
All right, with all the information that is available to us these days online and the hacking that is going on, how come nobody has come forward with any facts that would blow this entire case and put it back into proper perspective? Is it possible that the facts that everybody believe are there are not there?
Well, you just have to be careful with all these wild theories and everything. People get carried away with those kind of things. We proved through forensics that Dorothy had 3 barbiturates in her system, not 1.
Right.
She wasn't about to commit suicide. She was at the top of her career, and she had a movie based on the book coming. As far as accidental death go, we show in the book how that was impossible. So the woman was murdered. And maybe that's the most compelling reason why her investigation is the most credible of any in history. because she was killed for it. So people can kind of just really follow Dorothy along. And how many people have told me? I've gotten more than 500 emails across the world from people who've gained a new respect for Dorothy. They wish they had a reporter like her today. The book's become a bestseller, as I said. And you know what Dorothy did, Rob? Here's something novel for you. She went out there and found the facts, presented her conclusions with regard to what happened. Well, in today's news world, it's just the opposite most of the time. These fly-by-night journalists and one trying to get one-upsmanship before anybody else gets the facts out there, they just come up with a conclusion that they want, and then they fit the facts to those, whether those facts are really true or not. So Dorothy wasn't like that. She was a reporter of integrity, as people will learn, and that's why I'd strongly urge them to read the book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. I don't care if they buy it. They can get it at libraries all over the place or whatever, but read it and then look at all the videos and everything, and then they can make up their own mind, because there are hundreds of thousands of theories out there, but I think Dorothy's is the most credible.
With the information that you came up with pertaining to the death of Dorothy, how come there hasn't been a reinvestigation into her death?
Well, there has. Against all odds, my agent said that I was crazy, because the New York District Attorney's Office would say that I was that they had 12 murders in the Bronx last night, so they wouldn't want to get into this. But in January, I sent a letter to Cyrus Vance Jr. at the New York Police Department, and they agreed to look into this. And there was an article in the New York Post that announced that fact. And I remember the reporter telling me there were more than 235,000 hits on that article, because, Dorothy Kilgallen's name is still magic today. I mean, sure, people remember her from What's My Line, but there are all the reruns on What's My Line on the Internet and all of that. And so we made an agreement where I would provide them with facts and information that I had, and I did that until June. Then I went to New York City, met with the chief investigator assigned to Dorothy's case, gave him new information and all of that, and as of August, we were in business. I mean, they were really moving forward, supposedly, with looking into things and all of this. And then all at once, I was told that, hey, for several different reasons, they just couldn't go any further with this, whether it was too time-consuming, whether, it was too expensive, the investigation, whether they, hadn't followed up on a lot of things. I was just shocked that all at once they were going to drop this. And so I looked into it in terms of the witnesses that I had given them to interview, documents to be received and all of that, or to be secured and all of that, and found out they'd done pretty much nothing. So we've tried to get information through a freedom of information request in terms of exactly what they did, but so far they've kind of stonewalled all of that. But I won't give up. I'm the voice for Dorothy, and one way or another, I'm going to get the justice for her that she deserves.
I understand that you're the voice for Dorothy, but it seems that very few people have ever heard her connections to the JFK assassination. People hear about Lee Harvey Oswald. They hear about, the mob connection. They hear about John Johnson. They hear about the director of the FBI, the Cuban connection, and so on. Mm-hmm. Is there any sense in following this case with Dorothy?
I just make up your own mind. All I can say is, make up your own mind. I mean, the truth is tough to find many times. And, I happened on this story, and Dorothy, I think, led me along, as I say. But, as I said, the book's become a bestseller. There are thousands and thousands of people around the world who have just said, hey, wait a minute, boy, she was it. And she had discovered, what seems to be the truth as to what happened and all of that. So many times we kind of have to go down these alleys and narrow streets and all of that instead of staying on the highway, because, we're at a time in the United States and perhaps in Canada as well and around the world where we really need to question things, and not believe everything that comes out of the newsroom and on the Internet and all of that. And I'm pleased to say that this book, like others, is a stop-and-think book. You can read what Dorothy found out. It's not my words, hers. And I think the most compelling part of this, Rob, is these videotapes. These are very credible witnesses. I mean, Joe Tonahill talks about the Ruby interviews and how sharp Dorothy's mind was just before she died. The two hairdressers, one who found her body, describes that. And they talk about, how she investigated the JFK assassination and how credible that investigation was. These are people, again, that were right there. They have no reason to lie about this. So, I'll put Dorothy up against about anybody in terms of the fact that her investigation is so credible, because remember, she was there. There's videotape of her on the DorothyKilgallenStory.org at a news conference with Joe Tonahill and Melvin Belli. Mm-hmm. There's photographs of her at the trial. There's all this evidence that Dorothy was there.
All right,
and
stand
we've never
by.
had anybody like that.
All right, stand by. We've got to take our final break for this hour. Mark Shaw is our guest, Exonation, the DorothyKilgallenStory.org, and the reporter who knew too much.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone. Don't go away.
The Earth is under ever-increasing pressure from untenable lifestyles and growing populations. Yet, viable answers seem in short supply. What if I told you there's an ancient form that can empower you to take charge of your life? What if your entire family could be enfolded and supported by life itself, finding safe passage through challenging times? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Art School, with great news: an upcoming series of leading-edge online affordable classes based in an ancient form of shamanism, easily learned and used by your entire family. Galactic Shamanism, Art of the Ancients, Key to Tomorrow are a series of online adult and children's lessons instructing your entire family on natural law, how to cooperate with and be supported by the powers of the universe. Visit findyourpathhome.com to find these unique and powerful classes.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Mark Shaw's my guest, Exonation, DorothyKilgallenStory.org, and the reporter who knew too much.com. Mark, the fact that the New York City Police Department decided to drop the investigation into the Dorothy Kilgallen case after the information that you supplied with them, what does this tell you?
Well, there's a cover-up in 1965, and then 3 years later, these toxicologists who kept Dorothy's bodily fluids, they found finally the 3 barbiturates in her system, so you had a cover-up there with regard to not exposing all of that at that particular time. I don't know. The New York District Attorney's Office is hiding something. People may say, why is this case, important today? Well, the JFK assassination is history, and there's been so much distortion of history, and so I think it's important to take Dorothy's account bring it into the equation so that people can just think about what she did. But nobody wants a cover-up. nobody wants problems with transparency. Again, we have that with the problem with the JFK files still not fully being disclosed. But, there's government corruption, I think, again, in this situation. That New York District Attorney's Office found something that they don't want anybody to know. And I'll tell you what I think it is. When Dorothy Kilgallen died, her JFK assassination file, which she kept with her and showed to one of the panelists there at What's My Line on the night before she died, and showed him also some excerpts from the book she was writing, disappeared when she died. I was able, and the paperback, paperback edition of The Reporter Who Knew Too Much was released in October. And I put some updates in there, and one of them was this, Rob. I was able to find Dorothy Kilgallen's butler's daughter, who lives in New York City, and flew out to New York City and interviewed her for about 4 hours, and she told me some remarkable things that she had learned from her father and some documents and things like that. And one of the things that she told me was that between the time Dorothy's body was found and when the police department came and the medical examiner, FBI agents were in the home and carried out boxes of Dorothy's documents and papers. Now, we were supposed to believe that the JFK assassination file that she kept, and only just kept it, no copy or anything. Back then, she couldn't go down to Kinko's and make copies. She kept it with her all the time. We're supposed to believe that her husband found it, and he said, at least to some people back then, that he destroyed it. Well, I came up with a primary witness who says that she would have never in any way provided Richard with that she would have hidden it, and she would have probably let members of her family know. Well, regardless, I don't think that it ever changed hands. I think when the FBI agents came, that JFK assassination file was one of the documents and papers that they took out. I filed Freedom of Information Act requests with the FBI, and I got partial documents, but I've always felt that Dorothy's JFK assassination file could very well be in the FBI files. And my gut feeling here is that for whatever reason, the New York Police Department, the chief investigator there, and the assistant district attorney who I spoke with, somehow or another discovered what I believed, and that is that file is there. And for whatever reason, again, I suppose you can relate it to the JFK files not fully being released, that they don't believe that file should ever see the light of day because, again, it reflects badly on the government and what they covered up in 1963.
Let me ask you this.
That's my hunch.
Let me ask you this. Why would the FBI be involved in a New York homicide?
Say that again?
Why would the FBI, a federal, the federal law enforcement agency under the Department of Justice, why would they be interested in a New York City homicide?
Well, it's Dorothy Kilgallen, and Dorothy Kilgallen is the only reporter out there who is going against the grain with the J. Edgar Hoover. You know, basically, he committed obstruction of justice. Hoover did. I think that's a given in terms of everything that he did to smother that investigation. And now we have that one file, Rob, that's in those JFK files that says he was absolutely doing that. Well, he can't afford to have Dorothy Kilgallen use that investigation file and then include that material in a book. That's going to expose him, and there'll probably be a grand jury investigation. He very well could have been indicted at that particular time. So he's got a real interest in this.
All right, I can understand that. I can understand that. But why would the City of New York Police Department allow the FBI to take jurisdiction on a homicide? That, to me, makes no sense.
I'm telling you right now, I mean, the power of the FBI back there, maybe today that might be different, but boy, back then, J. Edgar Hoover was king.
All right,
and if he told the New York Police Department to go wait on the street, they would have done that. No question about it.
In the homicide report by the New York City Police, is there mention of the FBI?
No.
Is there any mention of the FBI in the crime scene report?
No, there's no investigation of any kind. There's no police reports that you're talking about. There aren't any. They never investigated.
But you're talking about a homicide. As soon as a homicide is committed, there has to be a police report.
It certainly should be, shouldn't there? But there wasn't.
My question is, if there's no report, how can we say beyond a shadow of a doubt that the FBI were there, number one, and number two, that the FBI took boxes of possible evidence from a crime scene?
We have a primary witness.
How do you know the witness is telling you the truth?
Well, I interviewed her, and
witnesses lie all
I'll
the
certainly stand by that. She was right there when it all happened, and she saw, her father saw what happened, and she has documents to prove that. So I'm not sure where you have problems with that.
Counselor? Witnesses lie all the time.
She's got no reason to lie.
Hey, she's part of a story.
Well, again, we're probably not going to agree upon this, but anyway, people can make up their own mind. They can read what she said, and hopefully my reputation as an investigative reporter makes a difference there as well. I mean, you just remember that we're not talking about today. We're talking about back then and a cover-up that took place. And if J. Edgar Hoover tells those investigators to jump, they're going to jump.
All right,
and I believe Brenda, and I think readers, when they read her account of what happened, will believe that as well.
All right. All I'm saying is that I find it very strange that a high-profile person is murdered in the city of New York, and there's no police report?
They don't. You have to remember that they're part of this. They're not, the medical examiner's office is controlled by the mafia. Back then, we don't know what happened. But think about this. And again, I assume you haven't read the book, but that's all right. Take a look at the staged death scene. All right, and all of the primary evidence that's in there, and in the official autopsy report, and then ask yourself why there was no investigation. And I think that will confirm the fact that they didn't want a part of any investigation at that time. Case closed. She died accidentally, and that's what happened. And the truth has been buried for 50 years.
All right, okay. I'm not doubting your integrity as a reporter. Mm-hmm. I am questioning a lot of the events that have allegedly taken place that, as a former law enforcement officer myself, make no sense to me. For example,
have you read the book, Rob?
No, wait a second. No, of course I haven't.
Well, then, how can you speak to this?
Well, because common sense says that if somebody dies and there's an autopsy done, the death is suspicious, there has to be a police report. If there's no police report and somebody's saying that the FBI went in there, took out boxes of who knows what, and there's no direct link to the FBI except hearsay evidence from a second party, that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, we're not going to agree about this, but I will say this, Rob, if you don't mind, and again, you're not questioning my integrity.
Yeah.
But why you would want to have an interview with an author about a book and not read the book, I do not know.
Do you know how many interviews I do? I do 20 interviews a week.
I don't care.
We've done many shows on the JFK assassination. This is the first time I've ever heard about this. I'm not doubting his integrity, but I am doubting the information, because it does not make sense. If somebody is murdered, a high-profile case, this person is murdered, there's no report of it, allegedly. Allegedly, the FBI were there taking out these boxes. Why? Because, do you know why? Because it adds to the suspense. It adds to the theory that there is a conspiracy when it comes to the JFK assassination. It sells books. It sells books. And that's all it does. Fact or fiction, you be the judge. I don't know. People come on the show, they think I'm just going to sit here and be just awed at them because they wrote a book. If you can't answer my questions, don't get upset with me. Get upset with yourself, because you, the author, who are taking words of the daughter of a butler, cannot answer my questions. And I'll say this again. It makes no sense to me that there is no police report in this matter. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.